Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to another Talk Architecture podcast with your host, Naziaty Yaacob. And the title for today is Working with Millennials and Gen Zs. Now, of course, the context of what I'm going to explain today from my point of view and perspective comes from my my engagement or collaboration with people of this age group, the millennials and the Gen Zs. I did not really get to work with the Gen Zs a lot, but I understand enough. From my point of view, again, I'm not saying that this is like a generalization. It's just giving my opinion with regard to the group of people that is defined by others. So from a reference here, zendesk.com, let me define what is a millennial and the millennial age range. Millennials, sometimes known as Generation Y, is a demographic cohort that follows Generation X. And I work with a lot of Generation X as well. But I don't know now. I tend to find myself working with a lot of millennials, may it be in disability activism and architecture design. So millennials precedes Generation Z or Gen Z, and the collaboration I have with Gen Zs is very recently. If you're talking about 27 years and below, from 2020 to 2022, when I were involved in a couple of studios where there are Gen Zs. And it was particularly during a time when it was during the COVID-19 pandemic, where there's a lot of interaction online. It's not good. Yeah, that was Gen Zs and pandemic doesn't work together for sure. I wonder who benefited from the pandemic more. I would think it's the boomers, but that's another discussion point. So millennials were born between 1981 and 1996, according to the Pew Research Center. So as of 2023, the millennial age range is between 27 and 42. Yes, I've been working with 27-year-olds and above, particularly those born in 1990 to 1993. There are others who were born in 1984 to 1987. So there are people whom I have collaborated as the studio tutor in their design thesis projects, and also subsequently when they graduated in other projects and collaboration outside. So it is added here that millennials were the first generation to grow up in the internet age, but also remember life before social media. They have lived through not one, but two generation-defining recessions and have been noted for craving work-life balance. So I was taking note of this article saying that the craving for work-life balance and the language or stories or what are the aspirations and concerns of this generation. I get it. I mean, I get all the nuances, all the concerns of this generation as a collaborator point of view, of course. Now, millennials, they are my friends' children's generation mostly. Most of people who are millennial, who the later part of the millennials, they had parents who were boomers, and they're not the older boomers, but the younger boomers, veering on to Generation X. Anyway, I get to meet my friends' children as well. But thinking about the millennials and their attitudes to life, they are like entrepreneurial. They would venture forth to explore things. Perhaps I'm just sort of comparing my generation with that generation. I'm being born in 1962, so that is the later boomers, and the millennials generation. So I end up working with them a lot because I'm preparing them, or I'm involved in programs that prepare them to be skilled and knowledgeable in universal design and accessibility. And there are quite a number of millennials who are disabled that I'm assisting their development or understanding about concepts to do with disability. And because my age, I'm looking at senior living, assisted living, independent living, and nursing care as well, the spectrum of care needed for those who are in, many are boomers, obviously, and we're going through this. And with this collaboration with the millennials, they are reminded of this, what we're going through. There's a lot of communication now on social media, isn't it? But the millennials, because they have known manual drawings, they have known, especially when they're architects or trained as an architect, they have known and have understood about manual drawings and sketching and brainstorming ideas, and they are not so reliant on technology in the first hand, having to cope with the transition between non-internet or manual, working manually or not without the internet. And the internet did not really establish itself until some time. So they could understand the problems, or they could understand where boomers would come from when they talk about certain things, when they talk about heritage, when they bring millennials to historical places, which we did at one point when the millennials were in the second year. We brought them to through the studio programs to historical places in our country and abroad, and we saw old and traits that are going to be diminishing, and we gone to spaces where there is a lot of things going on, layers and layers of history and stories and background. The appreciation for history is firsthand. And I wonder about the Gen Zs and their life and how they look at history, because they're totally reliant on social media. Well, I'm not saying all, but mostly is something of a second nature to the Gen Zs, 27 years and below. If their boomer parents or the Gen X parents don't take them out more out of all this digital age things, digital technology, they wouldn't know. So it's like a certain amount of effort needed to get them to explore things. So I'm relating this to architecture students right now, in all the universities in the world are Gen Zs. And I've had conversations with Gen Zs. So back to this topic, the difference between millennials and Gen Zs. I've had conversation with Gen Zs when they were in the middle of the pandemic online, and reaching out to them is a whole lot of amount of frustration. But it's learning online, not learning online, or learning online formally and doing a course totally online is different than doing other stuff online, like working on your social media platforms or recreationally doing stuff online is different. So giving them a chance, because we went through the pandemic and all that. But they were in the most impressionable age of 21, 22. And it was frustrating learning architecture online, but that generation did it for a year and a half. And did they actually understand what architecture was about? Because I am recollecting the same point I had discussed earlier, when someone who is very good in English and a Gen Z, of course, student in the second year, wanting to change to another course, not wanting to give up on architecture, and not asking the question, not having the chance to fall in love with architecture. Some people call it the lost generation. That is the point. If somebody is to make the point of the lost generation, that is the point where, because of online learning, they didn't get it. They didn't fall in love with architecture. They were not having the chance to visit places, do case studies. They were not having the chance to interact well. But when they went back to face-to-face interaction later in the second part of second year and third year, there was something missing. I mean, it was like they didn't go through the process where it's much more sensorial, the learning through the body. A bit on the psychomotor, cognitive functions of learning that we know it from the Bloom's taxonomy. If you're an academic, you remember this. A bit about how we learn through being active, to connect it with our body, to actually interact with other people, because then we're conscious of what's going on. A bit about that. It's not going to the classroom and listening to the lecturers and meeting your friends. It's much more than that. Architecture courses. One of the most important part of learning in architecture courses, when you go through architecture courses, is those site visits and those dialogue and conversations that somehow open up sort of an understanding about yourself and identifying yourself as an architect. Even if you don't end up being an architect or registered architect or professional architect working in an industry, but that kind of like exploration of through sketching and through questioning and the ability to actually find out yourself, we may create the environment, or we may facilitate or moderate some discussion as a lecturer, but for the student of architecture, they need to know where to go. So the lecturer says, okay, here is the time for us to, here's a way for you to understand, here is an experience you can experience. So then the Gen Zs would actually, okay, all right, I get it, what you mean. So this is missed out during their first degree, subsequently making them kind of confused during their first degree, and even more so after they graduate. What am I gonna do? Am I an architect? I went to architecture school, but I don't feel like it. Or, I mean, it's too hard and I think I better try something else. But would they have the resilience of the millennials? Would the Gen Zs need to redo architecture school if they had gone through it during the pandemic, by the way? But you can't, because that was an experience that you need to experience at that age, in that context. Of course, you can go back. Of course, you can relearn. So that's the reason why I'm talking about this, because my message, although I know Gen Zs may not be listening to me, but my message to Gen Zs are, you can relearn, you can love architecture again. It wasn't your fault. You are enough. You are worthy of architecture. Because if we go through the mental health balance perspective of things, yes, there's nothing wrong with you. It's just that, coupled with the fact that you're bound by technology and you kind of like, technology is there from the very beginning since you were born. Most of your primary school life. Then you took an architecture that needs to have a sensorial experience, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, the tactility, and even experiencing spatially, and also understanding about scales and proportion through physical being. I mean, going through and having more time to travel and discover. You missed out on that. So perhaps if you feel that there is something in you that is still connected to architecture, there is something in you that wants to do architecture for good, for your lifetime goals, there is a need to actually understand that you can do this, you can relearn this, and you can explore again, like as if you're 21 and 22 again. I think there's always something in your learning. There's something that when you were learning architecture, even on the internet, online learning programs, there were things that you were interested in. There were things that sort of stirred you to be curious about. And that's what learning is about in general to anyone out there. That is that curiosity of wanting to know, of asking questions, and eventually asking the right questions, because asking the right questions is imperative to make the right decisions, or to make decisions at all, to move forward. So that's another thing that a university can afford you, that time and space for you to go and ask those things, those right questions, and discovering yourself. And if university is like a city, city, or like, a place, and where there are stuff that you can venture into, and places that you can go to which would mesmerize you or would make you, would be different than what you usually go to. I think that some uniqueness is necessary, because you wouldn't know why you are doing a disharmonious, I would say, based on Eisenman versus Alexander debate in 1982, harmony versus disharmony. Now, if you were to create a disharmonious form, you would know the context, you would know where that come from, you would know the debate, you would know the conversation, because in your theory courses, there could be this discussion about that. To be honest, I tried to do that in my theory courses, which I did for the second year. And I don't think the second year was interested in sort of a boring lecture. Why the lecture is boring is because theory of architecture, we try to make the students engage with discussion, but they see that there is no point, or they see that it is it's like a show or a presentation. They don't see it as something that is connected to their learning, or they don't identify with this knowledge to be essential for their learning or their understanding. And it could totally be to do with the way they are learning it online. The same material that I did for the students, I actually published it in the YouTube, and there were 15,000 views on that. As opposed to when I got the students the link, not many people was viewing it. If there were 40 students, only 1 or 2 probably viewed it. So those 15,000 views were from people who appreciated, well, at least the first lecture. The other lectures, which there were certain lectures that people viewed a lot as well, but that was the most viewed ones. And of course, they're not the students. They are architects or anyone else who would like to listen about the introduction to architecture theory. And they appreciated it. There was a lot of comments which were positive, and I made friends with some people who also had some YouTube videos on other similar things. I mean, the curiosity about architecture theory is not there for the students of architecture. So where do they go for their philosophy? Where do they go for their understanding of theory of architecture? Is my concern. This is just me thinking about this, not the university. The university did not do this evaluation. I mean, that's a personal thing in a way that I want to find out what happens to this generation Zs, Gen Zs. What happened to them who took architecture? And if I found out that the most the student with the best skilled in English wanting to do graphic design eventually rather than architecture, then it didn't connect to her. It didn't connect to her. And I mean, I just want to state this thing because it's a significant observation on my part about Gen Zs. Millennials had the best of it. We had a lot of funds at that time. We went to visit, traveled to other places where much more significant historical or historical significance in culture, places in Malaysia and also overseas in Indonesia, in Bandung. So millennials had the best of it, and many of them actually went to study visits overseas as well. And from the year 2007 to 2010, there were several visits to Los Angeles and the west coast of United States of America. And there was one visit to Amsterdam and Rotterdam and visits to Korea. So I sympathize with Gen Zs in terms of they didn't get a chance to actually have those opportunities. And I think it's not something that is only happening in the university that I worked in, but the nation and Malaysia as a whole, and also globally, for those who are now about 24, 25 years old and trying to work out things. I would imagine how difficult it is for them to actually cope with working in an architecture company as well. Yes, I had interactions with some Gen Zs online where they were confused. There was a particular one, I mentioned this earlier, but I could repeat here. I talked to this person online. I used a well-structured way of finding out, and that person who graduated from architecture school felt she wasn't enough, she wasn't good enough. And she ended up working in an engineering company, and when she tried to have conversations with the colleagues on design, they couldn't interact. I mean, they couldn't engage with her on that topic, and she got frustrated and she missed design. And there were several reasons here. One is the learning that she did in the university, and also when did she decide to be an architect? She hasn't decided to be an architect. So of all that conversation going on, it was obvious that she needed to go to the second part 2, where the master's course, and go for specialization. But I've always held on to believe that by second year, or at least third year, one should decide one will become an architect. So it's kind of like decision making 101, where a human being would decide that they want to pursue it, and their goals and their dreams, and whatever the action that they take will go towards trying to get their dream. But so by second year, you can see that in the millennials generation, especially the millennials that are that I thought in that were born from 1983 to 1987 and a bit, these millennials did recognize that they wanted to be an architect in the second year, and you can see it by the work that they do in the second year. And one of the things that I would like to argue is the rushing of learning of digital architecture in the second year does not help with them identifying themselves as an architect, and the decision to make in the second year. And I have worked with someone who kind of got confused as well about what architecture is about. And after many, many sessions of talking to this person, eventually I found out that he felt that he wasn't able to love architecture as much because he was doing computer-aided or digital tools. And I said to him, you could design everything in manually. You could do it, because he was so good in his manual drawings capabilities. And I was saying, it's too bad that individuals are not allowed to express themselves in whatever medium or way they could express themselves. knowledge is there already. The skills to draw is there, in which there is something connecting with the skills to do it manually with the joy in which they discover themselves. If educators all over the world would not be so strict about this, or wanting students to actually compulsory do digital architecture in the second year, what is the reason? Where is the scientific evidence that it has to be digitally done? That is something that I cannot brain at all. So thank you for listening, and I hope that this episode gives you some idea about some of the things that's happening to Gen Zs and what has happened to the millennials when they were doing when they were in architecture school. So this is my observation from my interactions with this group of people. So thank you for listening in. See you again.